Welcome back, everyone, to Pontos Fathom Press. This is our Pontos Fathom podcast, episode number 24. And we're going to be talking about Giordano Bruno's De Umbris Idearium, or On the Shadows of Ideas, and how it has some intuitions with E8 Supersymmetry, higher dimensional mathematics. And I really want to focus on the intuition side of things, especially as it's relates to how, as humans, we live in a 3D world, and our perceptions of space are linked to our visual cortex, and our eyes are really great at looking at 3D objects. We see them all the time. But as we get into trying to visualize math, we're at sort of a disadvantage, and we get to these higher order structures. Think of a tesseract, like a hypercube, and I'll do some drawings to kind of talk to some of these things. And the idea here is science is getting to a place where as we push into the limits of physics and math from our current understandings of things, and some great minds working on getting insights into the scientific view of things, there's some very Platonic ideas that are coming out, like this E8 supersymmetry. And in a nutshell, smash me in the comments if I get it a little bit wrong, but the idea is if you get up to about 8 dimensions, there's a certain symmetrical, a certain symmetry that actually could have implications on how our physics works in the world. So there's actually some connection between higher dimensional structures and the physical nature of space-time and matter, energy, fundamental particles, the way forces interact. It's a very fascinating space. But the trouble for the average person, or for the non-scientist, is to say, how does one visualize all this stuff? There's some great videos out there looking at things like the Hopf vibration and just stepping up from dimensionality. So to give you guys a visual of it, we can start with a quick drawing. But to bring it back to Giordano Bruno, here we have Bruno also talking sort of in the realm of the Platonic ideal, and how there's a participation below from an ideal above. And then we have the E8 sort of vibration and lattice theory, supersymmetry theory, which in a way also talks about higher dimensional structures. And when we view them in the lower dimensional state, we have a higher dimensional structure, we view it in a lower dimensional state, it's almost like a projection or a shadow. And I thought that word was very interesting, how there's a shadow or a projection from a higher order concept. Now, traditionally, science would use math, the language of maths, and a deep understanding of math to sort of prove and map some theoretical physics and some properties, because math is a very great describer of how physics works, and both at large scales and at very small scales. At the same time, when you do see at least this concept of a projection of a higher order structure down to a lower order, and that's sort of a manifestation of it, right? So the idea here is let's work on our intuition around how would we get our limited 3 spatial time, sequential time mind to think at a higher level. And what are some things that I find interesting about Giordano Bruno's approach, where he was actually exploring this kind of concept of, if you can have the vision of the idea and then the manifestation of the idea in the material world, there's a sort of intuition there around the structure of nature, potential structure of nature. So let's just start with a quick drawing. For example, if one were to draw a line, right, we just see a simple line. Okay? But now let's say, what if we were to describe this line as a circle? So I want to try to go up in the dimensions, right? So what if we had the line is on a plane, and we see this line here, right? Now this line actually could be thought of as looking down at the top of a circle. So let's look at a circle. And imagine if we're looking down at the circle, so the circle would be through the plane. And then when we're looking at this plane from above, we see just the edge of the circle, right? But if we could turn the circle this way, we could see the circle's face. So from the 2D point of view of the plane, the line is simply the diameter of the circle. But if we could move up to 3D, if we could pivot the camera up, right? So we have the line here, and then the circle kind of goes through the plane. And the same thing can be for a sphere. If we look at a plane, and we had a circle in a plane, right? A circle is described by the set of points equidistant from a radius at a center. But what if we added a third space, and now we have a sphere? So the intersection of the sphere through the plane is a circle, right? So now we have sphere goes to a ball, okay? So we've gone from a line to a circle, and then we go from a circle to a ball. So then with the 4 space, it starts to get stranger, right? Because and there's some great videos. I'll leave some videos in the link. But you think of a cube, we often can represent. Now here, this is what's interesting about projection. Here I'm representing a 3D object, but this paper is only 2D. Your TV is only, your computer screen is only 2D, right? But by drawing these perspective lines, I can kind of make the imagination give the feeling that that's a 3D box. And if we were to go to the hypercube, which would be sort of like a cube, but we need to add one more dimension, one more 4th dimension. And we can do that by sort of drawing like another cube like this and connecting all the dots on this cube. So now we have sort of a cube like this, so the hypercube. But a hypercube can also be oriented in much stranger ways because the hypercube has an extra dimension of space to work with. So for example, at some points the hypercube could look like this, where the points are going, it could be, the cube could seem like it's inside, right? And then at other points it could seem like it's outside, right? So the idea is, what we're doing here is we are projecting down a 4D object in the language of 3D on physical 2D, right? And you can use this kind of, Joss Lay has this dimensions, 9-part dimensions series. I'll leave a link to it below. You can keep moving up to these higher order dimensions to get the intuitions that where our visual cortex no longer works, okay? Let's go into Giordano Bruno for a second. So now Giordano Bruno also has this kind of idea that, hey, not only are there properties of physical nature, but there are higher properties of physical nature, right? Now I'm gonna read from Francis Yates' great book on the Corpus Hermeticum. So it says, so we're talking about Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic tradition. This is Dame Francis Yates' book. Here's a quote from Reading of the Pymander or the Corpus Hermeticum, the Egyptian reflection on the universe in the mind. She says, now I quote again from the concluding paragraph of that resume. So this is going to link to this is Bruno's shadow of ideas, are the idea of images in the heavens which are closer to the idea of the divine mind and the things here below. than the things here below. So the idea of the divine mind in Bruno is the idea that if you could imagine we could have 4D eyes or 5D eyes or 6D eyes, it would be much easier for us to conceptualize this. So Bruno takes the approach of it's not about growing 5D eyes, it's about imagining with the intuition some of those structures. So here it goes, he quotes this, it says, "Unless you make yourself equal to God, you cannot understand God. For the like is not intelligible to save the like. Make yourself grow to a greatness beyond measure. By a bound, free yourself from the body. Raise yourself above all time." So here, raise yourself above all time, it sounds like, okay, go, it's not really become a god. It's not like having an ego to be godlike, some kind of edgelord thing. It's not that. The idea of it is, okay, you're in 3D. Now move out of 4D, right? So think of all of time, so think of it as like all of the film of time, and you can see each frame by frame, kind of like the things that they visualized a bit in Interstellar, let's say. You can become eternity. Then you will understand God. Believe that nothing is impossible for you. Think yourself immortal and capable of understanding all arts, all sciences, the nature of every living being. Draw into yourself all sensations of everything created, fire, earth, dry and moist, imagining that you are everywhere on earth. So now we're almost at another dimension. Now we're at not only are we above time, now we are in the, let's call it like the probability space, where there could be instances, 5D, 6D, extra dimensional sets of parallel streams of time, right? Parallel streams of time in 2 dimensions, perhaps. Ones where the rule sets are the same, one sets where the physics are slightly different, going up and down. You can have higher dimensions, right? Draw yourself in every sense of everything created. Fire, water, dry and moist. Imagine that you are everywhere on earth. If you embrace in your thoughts all things at once, times, places, substances, qualities, quantities, you may understand God. So he says, Yeats says, by engraving in memory the celestial images, archetypal images in the heavens, which are shadows near to the ideas of divine men, will depend on things below, Bruno hopes. To acclaim the Egyptian experience, to become the true Gnostic faction, the Ion, having the divine powers with him. So here then Yeats goes on to talk about how Bruno's memory system is sort of the first component of this. And the Shadow of Ideas does have this concept of it. So the idea is when Bruno is looking at the... here we go. He says, here you have in the clavis magna 12 ways of coloring your subjects, dimensionality, right? Coloring this, clothing your subjects is a dimensionality, right? So it's talking about adding dimensionality to the thought form, right? So species, forms, simulacra, images, specters, models, vestigia, indications, signs, figures, characters, and seals. Some work upon the eye, while others operate through external forms. So you're building models. So he's really talking about modeling. So the same kind of intuition that a 3D modeler might do to give us insights into higher dimensional visualization, Bruno is doing something of this sort in the Shadow of Ideas. And I think if we take a look at it, I don't have the image of the E8 Supersymmetry, but you guys can look that up, the E8 Supersymmetry. But in a way, it is very mandala-like. And if you look at some of these mandalas that Jung collects, you see that there's an intuition here in symmetry. There's a beauty in symmetry. There's a way that symmetry helps the mind to focus and to maybe, even if something's higher dimensional, one can use this as a tool for intuition. So like the modern day mathematician, while a very well-versed mathematician probably can look at the formula and have a certain kind of understanding of that. But at the same time, for me, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a scientist, I'm interested in math, interested in science. So when I see someone has taken the time and the care to visualize using, say, 3D software, or to conceptualize it. The visual cortex then can be used as part of the memory, part of the intuition system. And I think Bruno was quite onto this very early. Bruno writing about systems of memory. Yeats's other book is The Art of Memory. She goes into these in well detail. So maybe a quick note here into some appearances of Bruno in fiction. I'm reading the Three-Body Problem by Cixin Yu. And Bruno shows up here in the middle of the book, so spoilers ahead if you haven't read the book, it's quite good. But the idea here is there's a simulation running that's trying to help solve a problem, and it's a problem about species surviving cataclysmic cosmic events, let's just say something like this. And what they've done is to get more and more minds working on the problem, they've gamified the problem. And they've looked at different level of physics and science throughout human history as the background of the model. So say like a civilization starts, and then in real time in the simulation, if the cataclysm happens, how long is a civilization able to go forward with their science before a cataclysm destroys them? And so in this case, we've got an odd mix of the simulation has Galileo, Aristotle, sort of avatars of Galileo, Aristotle. It says, the great hall came alive. They're calling to burn him. The Pope is saying burn him because he has a theory about higher dimensional solutions, let's say, of this complex three-body problem. Burn him, the Pope says, gently. The smile on his face was a little familiar to Wang, the smile of King Zhao of Zhang. The great hall came alive, and everyone seemed to be preparing for a celebration. Galileo and some others joyfully carried a stake out of a dark corner. They pulled off the charcoal black body still tied to the stake and cast it aside before fastening it in an upright position. Another group happily plied forward firewood around the stake. Only Leonardo ignored the commotion. He sat at the table pondering and occasionally used a pen to calculate something on the table. Giordano Bruno, Aristotle said, pointing at the blackened body. Like you, he came here and spewed nonsense. So this guy that's one of the characters, Wang, he's Wang Miao. He is talking about, he thinks he has a solution sort of to the problem, or some insight into the problem. And then the Pope says in his weak voice, use a low fire. So they want to burn him at the stake like Giordano Bruno. So I just call this out there because the idea is, it's offensive to scientists sometimes when one has an intuition without the sort of rigor, right? And on the flip side, it's offensive sometimes to the mystic. Let's call Bruno kind of a mystic. It's offensive to the mystic when they have to prove everything, right? But I think where those two worlds kind of meet is in the intuition. And there can be a thoughtful, reasonable, educated guess. I mean, think of scientific hypotheses, right? Hypotheses come out of intuitions, right? We can go through the whole list of Descartes' angelic vision inspiring his works. He had a vision, right? Even Newton and Einstein also daydreaming with their, I think Newton used windmills and Einstein loved electric motors, right? So a person who's in the space of the windmill, of course, is going to dream about calculus and a moving curve over time, right? A vector changing over time, mapping out a sine wave. It's right in the calculus pocket. So the windmill guy with the differential axis of a windmill transforming the wind direction toward or the watermill direction, transforming that to a grinding stone, something like this. Those transformations are exactly what calculus is about in a lot of spaces. And to think of Einstein talking about forces at a distance and gravitational fields and this kind of field theorization, what better place to have intuitions than looking at an electric motor which has electromagnetism, and it kind of illustrates, it's kind of like the 3D simulation, right? It's like a 3D simulation, but it's just in their imagination. And I believe Bruno is doing this exact same thing. Bruno has a great quote, something like, I'll paraphrase, but the quote is something like, in his work with the memory theater. So if you understand Bruno's memory theater, it's the idea that you can use the brain kind of like a computer, and you can store images in the mind by associating them with mnemonic devices. So he'd build this, let me get the book out. He'd build this temple of the theater of memory. Maybe that was popularized by like the Sherlock or something like that. So imagine you have a theater of memory. This is Giulio Camillo's theater of memory. And the idea here is the theater would have pillars, and you'd imagine in your mind a pillared amphitheater, and then the seats kind of represent all the areas of science or human knowledge, and you can put figures and statues and stories that allow you to remember whole speeches, whole books. So the idea is you build up a memory in the mind, and Bruno was very interested in this. There was another person named Raymond Lull, whom had the Lullist view, and Lull had the turning wheels. So I believe that Yeats has some pictures of the work of the turning wheels. So the idea of the wheels are here, something like this. So again, you get a fixed wheel with another fixed wheel and another fixed wheel. And now by dialing in the wheels, kind of like a decimal system, like a memory address in a computer, you can file away in the mind, oh, what's at each wheel? And then Bruno, so going back to the paraphrasing of Bruno's quote, Bruno kind of goes so far as, if one can get one's mind aligned with the way God thinks about things, then one can do the experiments without the physical world. Right? So for him, he's like, if I could build a simulation sort of in my mind that's aligned with the way the real world works. And this is a very crazy idea. This is very crazy. It's very mystical. And at the same time, isn't this what a genius like Tesla probably did, right? Tesla would dream of working machines, right? I believe there's a lot of scientists and inventors who have the dream of the machine before they make it, because the mind is able to, in Bruno's terms, have some grounding in the real physical properties at a deep enough understanding that they could do the experiment. Think of a physics simulator in software now, right? We have all these physics, most of the physics that's out there, we can simulate it in the machine the way real fire would work, the way fluid dynamics work. We have these simulations. And the thing that's very interesting, I think it's very powerful, is to realize that Bruno was able to do this before there was a computer, right? And let's not say that he was fully accurate. He's not going for measuring the exact numbers, but he's looking at the qualia, he's looking at the set theory, he's looking at the ideas and casting that projection down to matter. And it's very, very contemporary suddenly. It's something that they're actually looking at. In Pontos Fathom Press's Locksmith of Quanta, book 2 of the Quantum Locksmith, Giordano Bruno appears as well. In this book, there is the Locksmith of Quanta, and much time was spent in discussion with the memory wheels of Giordano Bruno, which the locksmith found fascinating. The quantum locksmith, sort of like a Doctor Who, H.G. Wells time traveler type of character, but at a quantum level. In fact, Virginia was confused by his fascination, but Virginia did not know there were many paths to knowledge. Bruno and the locksmith were discussing the memory systems, one of which referred to an Arabian star charts from Bruno's library. How did you choose these charts? Out of the section of the heavens, the locksmith asked? And again, why did you choose the fixed stars of that particular area? Area is the exact term, and my answer might surprise you, said Giordano. But in fact, it was made from the workings of the general memory system itself that I was drawn to interest in these charts. The memory system works not only by mnemonics, in their natural alignment with deeper concepts, Bruno explained, by aligning things not so that they are merely remembered, but that they take their place in the framework of the natural order, I am able to turn the memory wheels to discover an unknown sign, a sign that once read reveals the new knowledge for me. Fascinating, the locksmith thought. By aligning the things to their natural order and by imagining a symbolic system to rearrange his thoughts, Bruno here has turned his memory system into a kind of computer, a virtual one, in that entirely in the confines of his own mind. And then the locksmith says, let's use your memory system to find this missing star, right? So the book goes on. Finally, we have the kind of author's reenactment of Bruno's being burned at the stake. So the tribunals of the Roman Inquisition hereby review the accusations against Giordano Bruno, the inquisitor announced, breaking the silence. Be it known that the accused has long list of heresies, including the belief of Hermes Trismegistus, the publications of the blasphemous books, the heliocentric theories of Copernicus, the infinite universe model. And then Bruno, he's tied to the stake, and he's starting to say, yes, about infinite worlds, infinite beings. He's thinking of the Ramus systems of wheels, like gears in a vast interconnected internal memory machine, like the dreams, way beyond the dreams of Camillo and Flood. Far away, he could hear the sentence. The tribunal finds the accused guilty of heresy against Rome, said the inquisitor. And then, as if produced by the vast integration of cosmic knowledge, before Bruno's mind appeared the key that the locksmith had given him. Not just a memory of the key, but the product of a long chain of signifying calculations that in fact reproduced the key in virtual memory form. An idea of the key, representing the sum total of the original key from the locksmith's ring. The sentencing to the burning at the stake will commence, said the powerless inquisitor. Giordano Bruno is about to be burned at the stake, but he learns to escape. Like Al-Ghazali's bird, he is freed from the cage. As his body began to burn in the flames of the Inquisition's pyre, Bruno, with key in hand, had opened a quantum doorway at the back of his mind. And as the flames consumed his body, he was already gone. Well, at least all of the quantum information that had been once stored in Bruno's brain. Bruno had been right. The information can survive the black hole event. For Giordano Bruno had created what amounted to a micro wormhole within his own mind, with only the power of his memory system, the virtual machine hewn out of human thought alone, to focus and harness the power of total matter transformation. All the locksmith had done was the tiniest of detail, adding an influence that Bruno lacked in the cosmological understanding to even consider it, yet fathom it. And there you have it. Little quote from Locksmith of Quanta, talking about intuition, Giordano Bruno. Really thank you guys for watching. This will be our last podcast for the year. So Happy New Year to everyone. Hope you guys are safe out there. Looking forward to doing this live in 2022. If you're interested in the Quantum Locksmith book, you can check that out on links below on our bookstore. And looking to get these podcasts as live streams. So if you could like and subscribe, help us get the YouTube algorithm to recognize us, keep it going. Also can check out our Patreon and all of our other books. We've got tons of books out in the bookstore. If you want to make a purchase, that would really help us, and I appreciate your comments as well and your subscriptions. I'm just going to end this up with a talk about Saturn. Just the idea of, with the reference to the earliest evolutionary states of Saturn, right? So the idea of Saturn is definitely interesting, right? The idea of Saturn as duration, okay? So here we're talking about Steiner, and the idea of Steiner's Saturn is, we'll call it time, right? So if we're talking about higher dimension, when the warmth condition of old Saturn, there's also the first emerges what we call time. The previous conditions, in fact, are not temporal at all. They belong to the realm in which spiritual science may be named duration. All that is said in the book of conditions in the realm of duration must therefore be understood in this sense. It must be borne in the mind that any expression implying time relationship is used only for the sake of comparison and exposition. In human language, even those things which in a manner of speaking precede time can only be characterized with words in which the time concept is implicit. We must remember that through the first, second, and third Saturn states did not take place one after another in the present-day sense of the word, we cannot, after all, avoid describing them in sequence. Moreover, in spite of their duration or simultaneity, they depend on one another. And this is the dependence is such with a comparable to the succession of time. And then we'll say this one part here that says their own faculties have advanced to a higher level, and therefore they follow for them not unlike what sleep is for the human being. Periods of activity on Saturn are followed by times when they are living as if they were in other worlds, and then their activity is turned away from Saturn. Consequently, supersensible perception sees in the Saturn evolution here described a rise and a fall. The former lasts until the state of warmth is developed and matured. Then the play of light, the waning process begins. The germiseed man passes into the interval of rest begins. So I just wanted to call out time because this also gives us, again, in Bruno's discussions, the idea of using the deities of our traditions, much like Jung has mandalas, and that E8 supersymmetry also seems kind of mandala-like. I mean, it's a symmetry in itself will give us that feel of mandala, right? And so the idea that that E8 lattice that you can see on various YouTube channels is only a projection. It's a shadow of what was really happening. So we have to think of higher order structures out of the plane, out of 3 space, up into 4 space, into 5, 6, 7, and 8 space. And at that point, if you look at the topologies of those higher order structures, you could actually see, oh, this is the path that the electrons might follow, or this is a path that matter or space might actually be shaped by, or gravitational space might work in such a way. So you can really get a lot of insights through those visualizations. And I think it's just about intuitions, right? Finally, I want to just leave us with this 23rd concept, 21st concept is concept X. Numeric entities, some say, relate the actual truth or true existence as material through inchoate forms have to ideal forms. Then the 22nd concept, Y, consider forms threefold. This again is from Bruno's De Umbris Ideum. The first of these is the potential to be formed, on that you can produce this act. This is not properly a thing, nor the thing produced, which is called the form. The second of these is that which is formed as a part of a thing itself, which does not belong to this, but is called the likeness of that. So now this is a simulation, right? So you have like kind of the instructions of something, right? The third is bounded by anything but the quality of an inherent figure. This kind of thing cannot receive rational ideas. Fourth, that by any such thing formed, it has retained the name idea. And this is called the 4 ways. In artificial things themselves, before the realization of the thing fabricated, intended first, before the second in the principles of nature, before natural things in the divine mind, and before the nature of all things. So again, this is sort of like instantiations, or the way the down projection from higher order structures, which could be linked to how our physics works, cause energy to tunnel through space-time, can shape the fabric of space-time, can map the relation between large gravities and perturbations in space-time. It can map the disturbances and high energy states of subatomic particles and the folded nature of, if you think of fractal topologies in the unfurling of things like DNA, right? Something like this, where there's a huge instruction set from a very simple code. It's really riding on some of these ideas. So the 23rd concept he just talks about is the mirror image of the form. And again, now we're talking about symmetries. For some institution, as a figure impressed by a seal, some both the imitation and purpose as it presents a picture of the artist's intention. Some things through the interaction of purposes and chance, and by the way this is done, it can present a picture. Other things that happen completely by chance, and this has happened wherein the image depicted does not purposefully imitate anything. So now we're just talking about the crossing the symmetry lines, right? You take a torus and you slice it, and you can see circles at different angles, right? You can see circles that are connected, circles that are overlapped. So as you pivot planes of understanding, right, you can see structures appear. Some things happen neither on purpose nor by chance nor through imitation, if indeed such things exist. There's the greatest proportion of the ideal in the first case, less in the second, minimal in the third, and the fourth there is none. And finally, let's end on the 24th concept here. Agents from nature or from chance, not from the provisions of the will, not supposing ideas. Such would be the first effective cause if there were no ideas. Otherwise, this validates Democritus, Empedocles, and Epicurus. If you find it impossible to separate the agent from some system, be very insistent, and all your probing will prove most helpful. So that means study the thinkers, right? If we study the thinkers, we really can't go wrong. Okay, thanks. That's all I got for this one. Hope it was interesting. Touched on a lot of things, mainly about shadow of ideas, how maybe E8 supersymmetry is the new Platonic ideal, just manifesting it in a way that it can relate directly to mathematics. I think it's very exciting. Like Giordano Bruno, even you not being a mathematician or a scientist, you can build up intuitions of these. YouTube is filled with tons of educational videos. You can watch Harvard lectures. You can watch historical lectures like great historians like Francis Yates talking about concepts, people reviewing all of these. So read, enjoy, learn. Happy New Year, and we'll see you in our next podcast. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye-bye.